isn't fair, you know. I mean, they might not have seen what they thought they saw, but they seen something.
What part of the country did this happen in, Pamela?
Southern Indiana.
Well, what I find is amazing is you can pull people from around different areas of the United States that don't know each other and have never really told their encounter before on what they saw. And as they start describing what they saw, there's almost, I mean, isn't Pamela's description, Shannon, almost identical to the last guest we had? I mean, isn't it really just almost identical to what she's describing? The way the hair was, the way the eyes were, the way the mouth was, the way the nose was.
It looked more human than animal besides the hair. If the hair hadn't been there, it would have looked more human. You know,
Right.
But I know for a fact that we don't live in a world that has 9 foot to 10 foot people.
Right.
You know, and when I was a little girl in church, we met the tallest man in the world and the shortest man in the world, and he would have towered over this man. You know, the Bigfoot would have towered over this tallest man in the world, and that was in the early 70s. You know, so and to even compare that with this, what I saw, it was bigger. It would have stood over top of it by a couple feet. You know, and 10 times wider. You know, I'm 5'6.5", and it probably from the top of my head to my knees or right around the knee area was how wide his chest was. You know, and he was just massive. And I've never, like even wrestlers, football players, I've never seen anybody that was this muscular and the build that this thing was. You know, it creeps me out just to even talk about it. Sorry.
Yeah. No, I understand completely.
You know, up to like a month ago, that was the first time I ever put the whole thing out, you know, out there.
And I want to thank Pamela for coming on the show and being brave enough to share her encounter. I know the afterbirth, eating the afterbirth, gross, but what did you think, Will? What did you think of that encounter?
It's pretty interesting. I mean, the first thing that struck me when she gave the description, especially when she got to the teeth, immediately my mind went to the an older type 2 creature. And you know, eating things like afterbirth and stuff like that is gross, you know, when you put a human perspective on it. But it's what wild creatures do. I mean, they go after whatever's easiest, and especially an older creature will go after just about anything.
Yeah, it was definitely interesting. Go ahead,
and
Will.
the coloring, you know, you're right about that. The cinnamon colored, you know, the auburn kind of reddish brown is by far the most common color mentioned in sightings. And then, of course, black and brown and white or light gray certainly are there. And I probably shouldn't say this. I'm going to throw a little teaser out there, and I'm not going to divulge my secret. Renee DeHinnen gave me a secret about the white or gray ones that's unique to them. And I'm the only one that knows it since he passed away. And it's sort of a control measure. But I'm just going to let the audience, I'm going to leave a cliffhanger right there because I'm not ready to give that secret up yet.
What a dick.
He just called you out for his classic dick move. Oh, goodness gracious. You know what I found interesting was the fact that she admitted that the creature had seen her, but it still decided to come closer, which is not usually the normal MO of these creatures. And if we're assuming that a white Bigfoot is, and she said it was very wrinkly, it was an older one, maybe it just knew it needed to eat that bad that it would chance coming closer. Yeah.
Yeah, it was hungry. And the older ones probably don't get a chance to hunt as well as the younger ones do. And that's very common. I mean, when you look at cougars and things like that, they'll attack things the older ones will that they normally wouldn't. You know, it's out of desperation.
Right.
Yeah, and it sounded almost desperate. I mean, the thing sounded pretty ballsy going down there and like grabbing the dead pony and then grabbing the afterbirth. I mean, it was almost kind of a desperate.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, if you guys were really hungry, wouldn't you just, I mean, whatever you could find, right?
Yeah, the behavior
dead baby horse or afterbirth, so.
Right.
Yeah. No, I know a lot of people ask us, and one thing I wanted to, before I jump to calls, because I know we got tons and tons of calls, and I want to interview Will and kind of drill Will on his interview. I'm just joking, Will. I just normally interview. But, a lot of people ask me all the time, and I'm sure you guys get asked this question, what your favorite show is that we've done over the last 75. And I guess I'll start with you, Shannon. What's people ask me, God, I just have a hard time remembering the last 8 shows. They'll tell me hey, do you remember in episode 32 when you guys talked about this? And I have no idea what we're talking about.
I can't remember what we did last week.
You know what? Not to sound like I'm trying to, kiss, pardon my French, kiss ass or anything, but yeah, I had to say it because it's just. But when I was early on and you and Woody finally told your encounter, the fact that you guys you could hear the emotion and you two were finishing each other's sentences for what happened during that encounter, it sold me. And I think that a lot of people agree with me, and I'm not trying to play favorites because, well, you're the boss, let's face it. But that honestly is my favorite encounter.
No, I appreciate it. What about you, Will? Is there one that stands out?
I don't know about one in particular, but I guess as far as one, I mean, I really love a lot of the witness encounters, but what Kunbo and Bear talked about just had me on the edge of my seat every time those guys talk. So I'd have to say they're my favorites.
Yeah, definitely Kunbo and Bear. Those definitely stand out. I would say, I guess for me, the Siege of Hanabi stands out.
Absolutely. That's another one.
Yeah, because I'd spent so much time on the person who lived, on the phone with the person who lived through that. And he had so much information, so much really good information. That one stands out. I think, honestly, and I hate to say it because it's the most recent ones, I would say Down the Rabbit Hole episodes have been, they
were big. They were big.
I don't know if they were my favorite.
Putting it lightly, they were big, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I had just spent months and months and months and months and stuff really looking into this and really digging. I know we all did, but I mean, really digging into it and really trying to figure out what's going on. And the more and more that I found out, the more and more I really didn't want to know what was going on. As you go through and you're like, really, that happened? And then you confirm it with 3 other sources, and it's like it gets darker and dark. The whole story gets darker and darker the more. And we didn't talk about everything. I know the 3 of us have talked about it personally, but on the air publicly, there's a lot of things that we didn't talk about because we were asked not to. But I don't know.
Which is a big thing. I want to make that point too, is when people ask us not to say things, that's a way to gain trust by people. So we really don't we're not going to give up our witnesses. So.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, there was just so much.
Yeah. People don't understand how much that we didn't get to tell.
If they knew actually, even a quarter more of what we knew, they wouldn't be questioning our content.
Yeah, and I hate to say that because it sounds like a jerk move to say something like that. If you have it, why not just spill it? But there was just so much of information that we came across, and so many different witnesses that we talked to. I can tell you.
And here's the thing too. I mean, if people ask that, if you start giving up sources, then pretty soon you get no information. Nobody's going to talk to you because you build a reputation for outing your witnesses or your sources,
Right. You burn that bridge plus any others that may come up. Absolutely.
Exactly.
Yeah. I just want people to know out there's way more to the story, and I'm sure one day it'll come out. And when it does, I think a lot of people would go, oh, that makes sense. I see why, Bob's being harassed so much. I see why there was so much involvement with the government. It's funny. I hear a lot of these, and I don't want to go too much into this because I'll go off on a tangent, but it's the last, I think, 6 Bigfoot shows I've listened to, their topics are government cover-up and Bob Garrett. So I'm hoping we can provide content for all the other shows out here for their next coming up shows. But
you did.
Yeah, well, and I'll try again here in the next couple of weeks. But
it's nice. It's nice they credited us for breaking that story too. Thanks, guys.
No, but the point of it is, and I was trying to tell people online, and I'm going to try and back off of Facebook and all these other. There's a reason why I'm not really in the Bigfoot community, and over the last couple of weeks, I realized why I'm not. But there is, if you're a researcher and you give yourself the title of a researcher, don't listen to an hour or two, or how many hours we did on the Rabbit Hole show, and then form an opinion. Look into it. Do your own research. Look into some of the stuff we talked about, and then form your own opinion. You're a researcher out in the field. Do some research before you go on the air and start talking about it. And I think a lot of them would be shocked as far as what we came across and a lot of that, and I don't like the argument that, well, I'm a researcher, I go and bang on trees on Saturday and Sunday, and I go and call blast, and no one from the government's bothered me one bit. Well,
there's a reason for that.
There's a reason for that, right?
Yeah.
And this goes beyond entertainment. There's the rabbit hole shows I almost didn't even want to air because I knew it would cause this storm out there with the community, and I was really hesitant. I almost didn't even want to air it. And a lot of the stuff that we found out that we didn't talk about, maybe even kind of question if I even really want to do this anymore or not, just because of all the stuff that we uncovered.
You remember when you and I talked last night, Wes, and I used the example when I wrote Notes from the Field 5 years ago. I put in those snap trees, the territorial markings, and I really was on the fence for months writing the manuscript, trying to decide if I wanted to put that out to the public or not, because I knew the moment I did, every kook would come out of the woodworks with, every time they'd see two sticks crossed someplace, that was Bigfoot. But I thought, I'm going to do it because I wanted my name attached to it first. I'm the one that discovered it. So, you have to roll the dice sometimes and put the information out.
Yeah. But I think it was one of those moments to where the more I started uncovering, the more I kind of questioned, God, do I really want to be a part of this? Do I really want to?
And you didn't read a lot of the things that was sent to me from my sources. It got a lot worse. And that's the thing, people don't understand just how dark all this can be.
Yeah. And it makes me wonder, and I'll get off this topic I don't want to drag the whole show down on this topic, but it's kind of like what Shannon and Will, we've all talked about. It makes me wonder, and this is something I've been wondering about over the last couple of days or last couple of weeks. The deeper and deeper we got into this, it made me wonder, I get the economy thing. The outdoor industry is $1 billion industry. $1 trillion. I get why they wouldn't want this to come out. People don't think it would cripple the economy. I have news for them. It would. It would devastate the economy if this came out because everything across the board would stop. So I get that. I get that these things are killing people. I think it's pretty obvious at this point. A lot of people have gone missing. If you take like Dave Pilates' books, are every one of those cases Sasquatch? Absolutely not. Is there a portion of those cases of people missing that are Sasquatch related? Absolutely. There's a lot of mysterious deaths out there to where if you don't believe in Sasquatch, there's no reason why this person died. But if and you start putting pieces of the puzzle together, you start realizing that these things are killing people. Do I think they all go out and kill people? It's another critique we get all the time is that we only have people on that have these terrifying stories. But do I think
That's
they all kill?
Of stories we get.
Well, yeah, and it
True.
is. It is. But do I think they're all out to kill people? I don't.
No.
Do I think a lot of them kill people? Absolutely, I do. So I get that portion of it, but I feel like we're missing a piece of the puzzle on why to cover this up. I feel like there's something else, and I'm digging into this, And if I have an answer for everyone, or I have a theory on it, I'll definitely present it to the audience. But I haven't come across it yet. But I feel like there's a piece of the puzzle we're missing. There's something we're missing.
And to play devil's advocate, we can talk about how we should bring all this out and everything should be in the light of day. But, for the people in the government may have a very, very good reason why they're doing what they're doing. So, you can't just condemn them because we're not in their shoes. We don't know what they know.
Oh, I'll condemn them. True. I think they're scumbags. No, I'm sure there's valid reasons for it. But in the same breath, if people are dying based on these things, then it needs to come out. Unless there's something, I don't know. I guess I don't want to get too much into that. I guess that's enough dark talk for the night.
Let's something more interesting.
Do you guys suppose that somehow, some way, how much alien talk has there been over the years in UFOs, right? Are they conditioning people to finally let that out? Well, what about all the Bigfoot shows as of late? Like, if they're trying to completely cover it up, you would think that they would put a stipulation to the networks possibly to not even air those. I'm just, thinking out of the box a little bit. Maybe it's just random thoughts.
Sorry to cut you off there, Shannon.
No, you're fine.
My view, though, on all these shows is look at the character of the shows.
Mm-hmm.
And if anything, yeah, they're not, I wouldn't say they're conditioning people. If anything, those shows, and it's probably, not government related, but these shows all portray the subject in one way. And if anybody was behind that, it seems to either discredit the subject or to at least help keep it on the fringe of believability to the general public.
Yeah, I think anytime you can use the media in your favor, like they do with these shows, I think that, and I've thought about your question too, Shannon, that's come across my mind too, is are they kind of, I thought that with all the zombie shows, all the zombie movies coming out, I'm like, man, is there like a major disease coming that we need to prepare for? Because they sure seem to be on this kick about zombies lately.
Your cough has been going on a long time, Wes.
Yeah.
There's something we need to know.
Yeah. But no, I agree with you, Will. I think that they have these shows for, one, for entertainment, and two, kind of to make a joke of it. Like, let's call a show Finding Bigfoot and let's never find anything. Over time, people watching that are going to go, man, is this a joke? I mean, there's nothing of substance that they bring forward.
How often do we hear that or see that in our emails? I mean, hundreds of times.
Yeah.
And, people call it a joke. I mean, I don't know how they keep the ratings or keep their show going, but that and, there's all the other ones that are really kind of junk. I mean, there's really nothing substantial in any of these shows.
The only positive thing I can say is it's brought it to the forefront, though. It's brought interest back into the subject. I didn't mean to cut you off, Shannon. What were you saying?
No, you're fine. No, I agree with that completely. At least we have that. At least it's a little bit more mainstream, although, like you guys are saying, it's more the giggle factor.
It's kind of like the tabloid factor, though. You know what I mean? It does bring it out to the forefront, but it's kind of on the tabloid forefront.
Yeah. I think the only network, and I was mentioning actually right before we went on the air, that is doing anything that at least takes the giggle factor down a little bit is the History Channel. I think they're doing a halfway commendable job of looking into the subject, and they still go very skeptical with it, which is good. That's good to be skeptical. But for the most part, when you're taking a disco ball and monkeys and Girl Scouts into the forest, that's not a good thing.
Just that combination sounds all wrong.
That's a party, man.
I don't want to know what kind of party
According
that
to
is.
Finding Bigfoot, that's how you find Bigfoot. screaming Girl Scouts and disco balls. So, yeah.
Yeah, and it's sort of that, and we'll change the subject after this, but I just want to make one last comment. It's sort of that mentality. It's like I hear all of these other quote unquote researchers, and I'd love to know what they're actually researching, because like I said, if you're banging on trees on Saturday and Sunday and you're out there screaming in the woods and no one from the government's ever paid you a visit, that doesn't mean that there's no cover up going on. Trust me. I mean, then I hear the argument too that, well, as a country, we can't balance a budget and all Congress does is argue back and forth. I got news for people. I used to live out in Nevada, and there's a military installation out there that quote unquote doesn't exist. And I can tell you, if you get within about several miles from it, they know you're there, and so they know how to protect a base. I can tell you that much. That doesn't technically exist. And I'm not trying to sound like a conspiracy theorist, but this whole argument that we can't balance a budget, so no one in the government must know what's going. Everyone's an idiot. I can tell you that's not the case. It's simply not the case.
I mean, and depends on the agency and certain compartments within an agency. If they're all, it's not all like one big conglomeration run by one person. The president at the top. It's all these different groups, and many of those groups are very competent, highly trained, very professional people, and very good at what they do. So if they're tasked to do something like this, I have no doubt they're very capable of doing that.
Yeah, and it's kind of like
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Well, what I was going to say is it's kind of like the Bob Garrett thing. If Bob had told me this stuff, I would absolutely believe him. But people don't understand. Bob Garrett didn't tell me any of this stuff. I got all this stuff from other sources, and then I went to confirm stuff with Bob Garrett, and there was stuff he didn't want to tell me that I already knew. And that's when I started really looking into this and going, maybe there's something to this, because I get all these other sources that are giving me bits and pieces of big information. And then I kind of cornered Bob on it and said, hey, did this happen? Did that happen? Did you guys do this? On and on and on. And it goes way beyond a torn up camp, and that's all I can say about it. But it goes way beyond a torn up camp. And I think eventually when the story actually comes out, when Bob wants, or when he's able to talk about some of the things, I think a lot of people are going to go, oh, I get it.
And there was some incidents that happened before that came out. Remember I told you that I was privy to, and I went for a few days where I was just stunned. My whole perspective on the subject completely went to a different level. And when I started looking at all these, the so-called researchers out there, I just have to chuckle, because I realized just how far they were out of the loop on this.
Right.
And I used to sit back for years and just not pay any attention to the subject, because most of these people had no clue what they were doing. And now the perspective, and you've gotten some of that perspective now too, Wes. When you know what's really going on, you can look at the subject and you just kind of shake your head, because you know that none of these people have any idea what they're doing. They have no clue what they're getting into.
And that's kind of the way I felt about it, honestly. I really, right. I mean, we talked about 10% of the stuff, of the actual information that we got. And I'll even go even further, a lot of the evidence that we got.
And then you realize why these people aren't being watched or followed.
Right.
I mean,
but honestly, after all of it, Will and Shannon, after all the stuff I saw and all the stuff that was sent to me, and looking into this, and I hate to be so vague with our audience. I absolutely hate being vague with our audience. I want it. Trust me, I would love just to blurt out the 90% that we didn't talk about. And if people want evidence, believe me, we have it. But this goes beyond just entertainment. I mean, people's lives are being affected by this. And there was a moment there where I thought, do I really want to do this anymore? Do I really want to be involved in this anymore?
That's when you realize how serious it is. When you start finding out that people's lives are being affected, then it becomes serious. People think it's a plaything, this subject. Oh, let's go out and bang on the tree and see a Bigfoot. Sorry, folks, it's a lot more serious than that. And it's not just from the government folks, it's from the nature of these creatures themselves. So it's kind of there's more than one thing to be concerned about with this.
Yeah, and I think that's why excuse me, still fighting that cold.
Zombie apocalypse.
That or I'm being poisoned. I'm not sure.
Yeah, I think as someone who has not yet actually seen one, like you two gentlemen, these last few shows have been, and I don't want to sound like a kid in a candy shop, because I know there is some serious stuff going on in the background. The things with Bob Garrett and what he's going through is disgusting. It really is. I'm realizing that, you know what, these things are they're really out there, and it's hard to grasp when I haven't seen one. So I'm with the rest of the, 90% of the audience or more that has not even, I'm not a knower. Do I believe and think that it could be out there? Yes. But these last few shows have, I guess, got me excited in a morbid kind of way, but I don't like seeing what they're doing to people that are actually finding the real evidence, mind you, not the Saturday banging on trees kind of folks.
Yeah, and I know a lot of people, like in the chat room, I just got sent a message, and I apologize to everyone for coughing in the mic, but one of the messages were, we'll start losing credibility if we don't share, and I mean, this is why I questioned whether even doing the Down the Rabbit Hole shows. I know for people listening, they'll think it's all entertainment, and I can tell you firsthand it's not. I mean, that's what my mindset was going into it, and the more and more we dug into it, the more and more there was kind of a feeling of, do I even really want to share this? Do I even want to air any of this? Because A, it upsets me, and B, some of the stuff we got sent, I mean, it was hard. It was hard to look at, and
right.
Well, let me say this to answer that person's remark. Here's the situation. We've been protecting people's identities and their locations, because of the factor of, being made fun of, things like that. And these are people that haven't told their stories either ever, or it's been many, many, many years and very few people they've told. So building that level of trust with people has gotten insiders to begin to contact us. And they give us pieces of information, and in exchange for not divulging where that information comes from. If we were to out those people, you can bet your boots we would never receive another piece of information again. This show would go in the toilet. So
would that person burn that bridge?
Yeah, so either people can accept a little more information than they're getting on other podcasts or Finding Bigfoot or someplace else, a real insight to what's going on, or they get nothing. So really, folks, that's your choice. If you want to know nothing, then we can tell things and we're done. Or we can continue to give little bits, and you'll get more of an insight than other folks have.
Right.
Yeah, and it's like I got sent stuff, and from different people, but I got sent stuff, and it was like, hey, if I end up disappearing, blast this everywhere, share this stuff. And when I got it, it was like, I don't even really want it. It's like I don't want this. It's like, what? I don't know. We should probably just leave it at that. I'm gonna end up
it's scary stuff. Yeah. It honestly is, and people have no idea what we get sent and what we've seen and heard. And believe us, we wish we could share it, but if we did, like Will said, it would be the last you ever heard from that source again, period. Plus, the word would spread, and we would get nothing from anybody.
I'll say one thing, though, is I have plans on all three of us going down to Bob Garrett's area, and I'm going to have Bob Garrett take us all out to these areas. And if these guys want my SD card from my GoPro, they can walk over my dead cool body to get it. But we're going to go down there, and we're going to find out what's going on. Yeah. And I'm pretty excited about that. So that's coming down the pipeline, and I'll post all that up on the website when that does come. But anyway, moving off to a happier topic, or Probably everyone's been bored to death over us just ranting and raving about being vague. And I apologize to the audience. I would love to share everything that we have. I would love to go and say, hey, look at this. Believe me, I'm torn on doing that, but I'm not going to do that. But there will come a time when all of that will come out. But please believe me when I say that going into a lot of this stuff and a lot of stuff that we didn't share, like I said, Will and Shannon, it made me question, do I really want to be a part of this anymore? Do I really want to? It was disturbing. There was a lot of things that really, really bothered me. And I guess I'll leave it at that.
It certainly gives you a different perspective on the whole subject and all those involved in it, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does. Mm-hmm. It really does. It gives you a whole different perspective. And that's why it bothers me so much when, I hear these researchers that are, will say, well, I go out and bang on trees and I go and scream and yell on Saturdays and Sundays, and no one from the government's ever once bothered me.
There's a gulf. Really? There's a gulf of difference between where they are in this and where we currently are with this. And that's not patting us on the back. That's just because of what we know. Mm-hmm. And have been privileged to be brought into it.
Right. Yeah, no, there's a lot. Well, I know we're burning up time, and I want to get to some of the phone calls too as well. I know, like, Jim has questions for you, Will. Tony wanted to share an encounter. There's a long list of people that want to come on the air and talk. And we're going to have to do more of these call-in shows for people, because I feel like we're burning.
We get so many calls. Yeah.
Yeah, and we appreciate everyone that calls in. And if we don't get to tonight, please send us your encounter story or your comments or anything and we'll work hard on bringing you on the air if we don't get you tonight. But if you go to SasquatchChronicles.com and you go to the About section, all of our contact information is there. If you want to send it to support at Sasquatch Chronicles, Will gets it, I get it, Shannon gets it. And so all three of us will get it at once. But one thing I want to do, I know with you, Will, I know you've talked about your first encounter when you had walked into the tree line. I know you've had 2 encounters, but I wanted to interview you on your encounter before we jump to phone calls. Okay. So tell me, Will, what was your knowledge of the subject prior to... I'm just playing.
No, that's a valid question.
It's a valid question, yeah.
And the reason, and it's funny, we've been asking that all this time and nobody's ever questioned why. The reason I always ask that question is because there's so much information out there for the past couple of decades. It's just permeated society. So if somebody says they had an encounter, I don't want, from a psychological standpoint, all this stuff, let me back up just a tad. When you watch TV, whether you're actively watching it or if it's just playing in the background, your mind still records stuff that's going on there. You know what I mean? Details and things of whatever's on. And I think a lot of people absorb certain particulars of this subject. So when they're relating an account, they're not relating it accurately. So going back to mine, and I want to, before my first encounter, or first find, I'm going to go back a couple of years before that because there were a couple of accounts and kind of give people the mindset. This was back in 1968 when I was 10. And the year after Patterson got his film, most people would think, wow, everybody knew about Bigfoot. Well, that's not the way it worked. With things in the news, at least back then, before mass media, internet, things like that, it wasn't plastered all over TV or the newspapers. It was through very small channels, actually, things like Argosy magazine and some localized newspapers and stuff. So it took that film years to actually get saturated into the public mind. So when I was 10, there was no such thing as Bigfoot or Sasquatch. Nobody ever heard of anything like that. And we lived in the Puyallup Valley. We had 40 acres on the Puyallup River, mostly heavy timber. And there were 3 houses on the road we lived on. And this was, to give the people a mindset, you talk about a rural place, it was literally a dirt and gravel road. and we were the very end farm on the end of this road. And we were sitting watching TV one night, and I think it was the fall after school had started, and you could see a long way down. Our driveway went way down and curved around probably 400 or 500 yards easily. And we saw this light. I happened to look outside, and I seen after dark and saw this light bobbing up the road. And I told my mom, I said, look, there's somebody's down there. It looks like a flashlight. And it was going a little too fast for a flashlight, so we watched and, come up to the house, and pretty soon there's this furious banging on the door. And we answered the door, and there was a boy there about my age, and I thought, I didn't know who this kid was. I mean, we lived in a pretty small town, so I would have known any kid my own age. And he was just hysterical. And my mom told him to come in, and she got him calmed down, and he kept saying, I saw the rock quarry monster. I saw the rock quarry monster. It was after me. And we're kind of looking at each other like, what the heck's he talking about? What's the rock quarry monster? And so when he finally calmed down, he says, I got on the wrong road. I was at my grandparents' place, and picture this road. It was a big hill on one side, heavy timber, and a huge swamp on the other side of this road. And out there, in the daytime, it was kind of creepy. So after dark, it was not the place you wanted to be, especially as a kid. So he said he was riding along and trying to think of where he was, and he thought he saw a person coming out of the swamp. And he said as it got close, it was this giant, hairy, man-like monster covered with white hair. And we talked about, the guest story earlier with the white Sasquatch. And, of course, it scared him to death. He took off riding away from it, and then he ended up at our house. So my dad finally came out of the bedroom and asked him who his grandparents were, and he knew who they were, so he took him back there. And I asked my mom, I said, have you ever heard of this rock quarry monster? What's that? And she says, no, I don't know what he was talking about. Maybe he saw a bear or an old hermit that used to be in the area. So I didn't think much of it until I heard my parents talking in their bedroom later that night. And my mom asked my dad, she says, well, what do you know about this rock quarry monster? And he says, I think it's just some old crazy hermit that hunts around the rock quarry that was just up the hill from us. So I didn't think much more of it after that. And then the next summer, I was out riding my bike up and down our road, and my mom and my two younger sisters were out by our corral, and they were watching the tree line. Now, normally, if anybody lives on a farm and has cattle, they will move. They know that cattle will move from one pasture to the next. They have a pattern. They move every day. Well, this particular afternoon, the cows were all up in the barn, facing out. And I thought, that's weird. They should be way down the far end of the pastures. And I went to see what my mom and sisters were looking at. Well, there was something in the tree line, maybe 100 yards from the barn, that was just thrashing the trees violently back and forth at the edge of the brush. And jokingly, if I was kind of a smart aleck as a kid, I said, maybe that's the rock quarry monster. And my mom says, there's no such thing. And that was the end of it. I thought, ooh, okay. But we couldn't see what was in there, but there was something, and it was much bigger than a bear, and I had seen a bear on the property, so this was much larger. But, it still didn't dawn in my mind. So moving forward, we moved from that area in 1970, about 7 miles away out of the valley. And it's kind of important because of the location, because it wasn't that far from the Puyallup River. In mid-December of 72, my friend Mark and my parents weren't the kind of people that were going to shuttle me or my friends back and forth. They just weren't part of that whole mindset. If you wanted to do something, you could do it with your friends, but you had to figure out how to get there yourself. So we would spend the weekend at each other's places and then, ride the school bus there and then back the following Monday. So my buddy Mark came over and spent the weekend, and it was really, really cold that particular weekend. There was snow on the ground. It was about 17 degrees or so. And we kind of got bored, so we said, well, let's go over to our friend John's house. It was the next closest place, about a mile away. And normally we had a trail that went through the brush to get up there, but we couldn't find the trail because of snow. So I said, okay, we'll walk down the road and we'll go along the railroad tracks to go right in front of John's house. So we walked down there, and if you were to picture the railroad tracks, they went east and west, and they were all along the side of this large hill. On the left side of the hill was the upper part, and they come across and went down below on our right side. And they had cut a fire access road the previous summer on either side, just a dirt road for access to the tracks through the timber up there. And we walked along, and when it got into a really heavy timbered section, we saw ahead of us something red in the snow between the rails and the track. Everything was covered with snow except the rails. And we walked up there, and here are these intestines, animal intestines, that were maybe from a coyote or like a medium-sized dog, something of that nature. And we couldn't figure out how they got there because there was no footprints of any animal at all. The snow was pristine. And we looked down below us on the fire access road, nothing there, nothing behind us, of course. So I said, well, you go ahead up the tracks, and I'll climb the hill to the left and see if there's anything up there. And it was about 10 or 12 feet up there, and when I crested the road, the ground was the snow was chewed up with footprints. There were footprints everywhere up there. So I hollered for Mark to come and take a look. And we're standing there with our mouths just kind of hanging open because there was there were dozens and dozens of these footprints. And they looked kind of like human tracks, except they were bare feet. And I said, who in the world would be up here in this temperature in the snow in their bare feet? And, we put our feet next to them, and they were twice our size easily. And at the edge of the embankment, there was this big, for lack of a better expression, a butt print in the snow, probably 3 feet wide, and a big fist print to the right of that, where it looked like something had sat down with its feet hanging over the edge, and then right below that was where the intestines were. And I said, oh, well, whatever did that must have been right here and dropped them down. And then it dawned on me, I said, Mark, those guts aren't frozen yet. Whatever did that is right here, really close. Then we got scared. We took off running, and we got to John's house. We're pounding on the door, kind of like the kid did. And he answered the door, and John had 2 younger sisters and brothers. And of course, we come in there, and we were, 14 at the time, and it was pandemonium because our excitement got them excited, and everybody was talking at once, but nobody could understand what was going on. And John's dad comes in from the other room, and he says, boys, calm down. What's going on? So we told him, and he says, take me back up there to where you saw this. And he grabbed his .45 pistol and a camera, and we all went back up there. And we found there were 3 different sizes of tracks. The biggest one was around 18 inches, and I think the other 2 were in the vicinity of 15, 16 inches. And he didn't know much about it. Probably had seen something or read something. And he explained to us as best he could what this was. Now, as kids, we were big time into monsters watching on TV. So to find out there were real monsters in the forest, that kind of wound us out. So we would meet at John's every weekend for months after that, and then we'd head up into the woods searching. Never saw a thing until the fall of 1974, and that was probably about October because it was freezing at night every night during that time period. And right about dusk, my dog, my collie, was just going berserk and kind of facing the direction of where our barn was, right near the stand of timber. And we had pigs and chickens and things out there. So there was always skunks and raccoons and stuff coming in the yard. My dad told me all the time, he said, if something comes in the yard, shoot it, because they might have distemper and they'll bite, the cats or the dog or something. So I figured, okay, the dog's barking at one of these things, so I grabbed a .22 instead of my shotgun or hunting rifle, a couple of bullets. I went and grabbed the dog, told him to go get him, and he went charging out. We had a pasture next to the stand of trees, and there was a gate, so I had to go out through there and then go along the fence. And he got to the tree line, and he froze. And that dog never froze anywhere. He would always just go headlong into the timber. He got porcupine quills in his face twice because he was too dumb to not chase things. So I got about 50 feet from him, and he whirled around and comes running as fast as he could past me. And I'm just kind of dumbfounded thinking, what's that dog doing? I've never seen him behave like this before. So he ran back to the house, he jumped up on the porch, and he sat there kind of shivering. And I'm kind of scratching my head thinking, don't get this. I don't know what's going on. So I proceeded to go to the tree line where he was standing, and he was standing there just fixated with his ears up, not moving, tail, nothing. So when I got there, I could hear something moving inside the tree line. Now, these were, pretty good-sized Douglas firs, a lot of brush along the edge of the tree line there. And inside the tree line, there was a great big maple tree, and the base was probably, 3-4 feet across, this tree was. And so it was clear inside the tree line, but there was a lot of low-hanging branches, so I had to push my way through to get into this clearing. So I had my rifle in my right hand, and I pushed my way through with my left hand, and as soon as I cleared the tree limbs, I happened to look up, and remember, the light's kind of fading. It's right at dusk, so I could see in there pretty well, but it wasn't great because there was a lot of shadows. But in this clearing, in the leaves, here was this massive thing standing there, and it was moving the leaves with its right foot. And for some reason, I remember looking at the movement, and I can picture a lot of detail with the foot, the hair and stuff. And I thought to myself, what in the hell is this? And from growing up on a farm, I knew animals' weights, and hunting with my dad and stuff. I knew what animals weighed and sizes pretty well. So this thing, based on my own height, had to be at least 8 feet high, and every bit of 800 pounds. It was massive. The shoulders, like with you, Wes, talking about your encounter, how massive the shoulders and things were. This thing, I'd never seen anything this big before. And I was less than 15 feet away from it. And when it saw me come through, it stopped moving. And I didn't get great detail on the face because of the shadowing, but it looked a lot like what you see in the Patterson film, the conical shaped head, massive jaw. But the eyes, I kind of fixated on the eyes. It was staring at me and was not a happy look. And I thought to myself, oh my God, what do I do? And I thought, well, I'll shoot in the air. I mean, I've only got a 22. 22 is not going to do anything to something this big, because the shoulders were 4 feet plus across, and very deep, thick chest, from front to back. And I could picture the hair. The hair was, it was hair. It wasn't fur, and it was probably between 3 and 6 inches long. It wasn't uniform all over, and it wasn't uniform color. It was mostly dark brown, but there were streaks of lighter colored hair. And I can't say that it was gray. It could have been, I don't know, maybe more of a tannish or yellowish colored hair because of the lighting, color, kind of lose color at that time of day. But I thought, okay, I'll shoot in the air and maybe it'll go away. So I shot in the air, and it just stood there motionless. I could hear it, breathing quietly, and I hear movement from my right rear. So I kind of turned my head a little bit so I could keep an eye on this thing. And from behind some brush to my right, here comes another one. And it walks past me and stood over next to the first one. And it was a good head shorter. I'd say just right at shoulder level, maybe a little lower. And it was definitely lighter by a couple 100 pounds than the first one, but it looked very similar. And it kind of glared at me. So I sort of decided at that moment to take off running like the dog did and hope it wouldn't, snatch me up. And after we'd found, I didn't mention after that we'd found the footprints the first time before, when we got back to my house, and we were excited because, we didn't know anything about this. It was really exciting stuff. My parents and younger sisters just gave us hell, about that. So when you find something that's exciting to you, for people to make fun of you is really, it really puts your outlook in the toilet. And it made us not want to tell anybody again after that. So when this event happened, I ran back to the house and I called my friend John. I said, John, I just, saw these two things, run down the whole situation. And he said, well, what do you want to do? And I said, well, why don't you guys come over to my house tomorrow morning before first light, and we'll track them and see if we can't catch up to them. See, we were dumb kids. We didn't know what we were going to encounter. So 5 of us met up at my house the next morning, and it frosted very heavily at night. So we were able to track these two things. And we tracked him with our hunting rifles until we lost the trail when the sun came up and melted the snow, or the frost, I mean. So that was pretty much my first encounter.
Yeah, I just asked you what your knowledge was on the subject. So
I see. We're going to bust my chops. Okay.
No, that's
I just
that's an interesting.
He elaborated. That's all. No, I for one am really happy that you had that encounter, because without that and the subsequent one, you wouldn't be here with us. So I'm happy for that.
I wanted to ask you, Will, did you ever talk to your parents about what you saw? Did you ever go in there and say, "Hey, I just saw these two things out there in the wood line"?
I never did, because my parents were the kind of people, they were very no nonsense, and if they said something once, that was it. Even as an adult and a sergeant in the Army, and I was pretty close with my mom. I could have talked to her about anything. I never brought it up again.
Yeah, and I already knew the answer to that question. I just thought I'd ask it for people out there listening. The other question I know that Jim was going to ask you, and I saw it in the chat room, and I apologize for everyone in the chat room. I'm having a hard time keeping up. But why do you think that they didn't attack you?
I think it was because I was holding a rifle.
Yeah.
That's the only thing I can figure. I mean, because the look on their faces were not happy at all. I mean, I honestly think if I had not had a rifle in my hands, the situation would have ended up a lot differently.
Yeah.
I got the impression the smaller one was a lot younger one.
Yeah, do you think it was the female or the companion to the first one? Or do you think it was actually a younger one?
I think it was a younger one. I mean, I got the impression, and not so much at the time, but later when I studied anthropology in college, based on the weight distribution, that both of them were male. Now, I did learn later there were three of them in that group. So I'm assuming the third one was a female, but we didn't find any tracks of that one.
I gotcha.
You know what? I'm sorry, Wes, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
What do you think the weight was on the second one, the smaller one?
I would have said 500-600 pounds.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask you too, on your second encounter, I know a lot of people have heard or maybe they haven't heard your first encounter. I wanted to, can you go into your second encounter? What were you doing when you encountered the one out by the Washougal watershed? And can you describe what you saw and kind of go into the time of day and really go into?
That was a pretty brief encounter, but when I moved to Vancouver in 1986, I contacted Renee DeHinden and John Green and told them I had moved there, and both of them were pretty excited because they said, they told me that I was the first good Sasquatch hunter in the area since Roger Patterson. Nobody else had really done any work in that area since Patterson had passed away. So I started looking based on the reporter out in the Camas Record newspapers information along the Washougal. There were a lot of encounters up in that area, so I started looking up there, and it wasn't too long before I started finding tracks up there, and the tracks were, I think the first ones we found were 16-inch tracks, and up in the snow around there. So we were going up there. This was in March of '88, and we were going up to that particular area again, and I found tracks 2 or 3 times up there previous to this. So there were a carload of us. We were headed up there, and I remember looking at the water, and I always think about this because the water on the Washougal, especially that lower area, is just beautiful. And you know it, Wes, how, especially in the summer, that just clear blue-green color it is. I was looking at that, thinking about the Ohanapkosh River that I used to fish as a kid on Mount Rainier, and just kind of reminiscing. And while my mind was wandering off, as I was driving along, I saw something move just across the river. And that's not a very wide area through there. It's maybe between 100 and 150 feet away from where my car was. There was this, massive. Now, the first Sasquatch I saw was big. This one dwarfed that one, and it was a light gray color. and almost uniform, the color all over its body. And it was facing the brush, kind of sideways. Its left side was sort of facing us, and it took a step and just reached up, grabbed an alder tree, and it was gone in the brush. It left that quickly. And I stopped the car, and I told everybody in the car, I said, don't say a word, draw what you saw. Because I wanted to see if I really saw what I did. I was even questioning myself, even though it was right there in front of us. And everybody drew exactly the same thing. And there were some small details, like we actually did see part of an ear on its left side of its face, where the hair had moved away. But it was, I can't even begin to describe how big this thing was. I mean, the first one I saw, I'm sure was around 8 feet high. This thing had to be closer to 10. And the weight was, I estimated then, around 1,500 pounds, and I'm pretty sure it was close to that weight. It was huge. I found tracks of it later that were 18 inches long. And at one point I found tracks from this individual that were sunk into a gravel pile. Now, this gravel pile, after they're wet, with clay and stuff on them, get pretty hard packed, and it really takes a lot of weight to leave an impression. And at the time, I weighed about 200 pounds, and I didn't make a single mark in this gravel pile. These tracks were roughly 6 inches into the gravel pile. So,
wow,
that thing was heavy. It was heavy.
Yeah.
Well,
and what was it doing? Just walking away from you?
It was, I don't know what it was doing. It was just kind of standing, and I don't know if it was down there getting a drink or what it was doing, but it was standing there. And like I said, it was back was to the water. And then as my car come around this bend and approached, as soon as we were in sight, it just simply walked away. It took, I think, 2 steps and was gone.
What were you going to say, Shannon?
Well, I was curious about the ear because almost no one sees the ears. Was there anything anomalous or strange that you noticed about that?
Not really. It just kind of the way it stuck out of the hair. And it wasn't particularly big. I think the hair was just parted in that particular spot.
Right.
Do you think it looked more human-like, or do you think it looked more primate-ish in the term of like ape or...
I wouldn't say human. I mean, it wasn't really stooped as much as the first two I saw. It seemed like its back was a little straighter, sort of the shoulders up and back. Appearance-wise, I mean, it was very close to what you see in the Patterson film. The only difference was the shoulders were much bigger and wider. On that one, as the female, going back to the anthropology, if you see an individual from the back, and this goes for humans too most often, and this isn't anything against anybody, I'm not saying weights or anything like that, but the way human weight is distributed, generally in males, the center of gravity is high, and in females, it's lower, more towards the hips, and in men, it's closer to the shoulders. So you can generally tell whether something is male or female, at least in terms of primates, by where the center of gravity is. Mm-hmm. So this one was huge in the shoulders. I mean, I have no idea in terms of measurements how big that was, but like I said, it dwarfed the first one I saw.
Yeah, especially when you see something at a distance. I remember like when Woody and I had our encounter, I remember watching it walk across the road, and I remember when we went back up to get the GPS, I stood in the road with my iPhone, and I was filming it, and Woody said, well, I think it went across the road about here, and we were about here, we're judging distances, and I said, yeah, you're about right. So I parked the car there and had him walk back across the road where we saw this thing come out, and I remember thinking how tiny Woody looked when he walked across the road. He just looked so tiny, and it was so fresh in my mind at the time how physically large this thing was. And Woody's not really a small man, when he's a big guy.
And that just made me think about when you were saying that, how you went back and did that at the actual location. We weren't able to get across the river that day because the water was high and it was running really fast. But we did eventually get back up there and get across the river and to that spot. And the same thing, when you actually stood next to the tree, the Sasquatch grabbed, the place where it grabbed was probably a foot high above my head. And at the time, it looked kind of low, but, that's in the context of the creature. The creature was so large where it was reaching, and it kind of reached straight out. It didn't reach down or up or anything. It kind of reached straight out, grabbed the tree, and up it went. But the trees and everything looked so much smaller until we got there.
Yeah. Yeah, huge difference when you go back, right?
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. And 1,500 pounds, that thing's huge. I know the one we saw would have said about 1,000, and I remember thinking, God, I hope they don't get any bigger than that.
Oh, they do. And not long after that sighting, we had our sighting. I got a report from a local of another sighting just up the road a ways from there, about a mile or so. There was a road crew working, and it was kind of a comical. It was a quick encounter. There was 3 or 4 guys up there with a bulldozer, and they were widening the road for some new logging they were going to do up there. And they happened to notice this thing standing there watching them work. And they estimated the size about the same as the one I saw, but it was dark brown. And the dozer operator decided he thought he was going to scare it by blasting the horn. He blasted the horn on the dozer, and the thing screamed back, and it was louder than the dozer. Scared the hell out of the whole crew. So I knew there were a pair of them up there, and really, on the Washougal River isn't that far from where you guys had your encounter. I think it's probably a different group, but it's relatively close in there.
Yeah. Yeah, it's kind of this whole area up here in the Pacific Northwest, especially in Washington State, I think is somewhat of a hotbed of activity. And it's funny, the more and more people I talk to that are out here, out in Yakul or out in Cougar or some of these little small towns as you go up towards Mount St. Helens, a lot of times if you stop in these little country stores and you ask people, do you think this exists, or do you think it's pretty shocking, a lot of their answers. I don't think I've come across really one person that said, oh, no, it's complete BS. Every person I've ever asked.
Yeah, you would think people would laugh at you. I used to do the same thing. I'd go all over in Skamania and Clark counties, the little stores and restaurants and things, and I'd walk over to total stranger and say, "You ever see a Bigfoot?"
Right.
Waiting any second for the big laugh, but it never came.
Yeah. And a lot of them will tell you, I've talked to a lot here recently out in those areas, and it's funny because the first thing they'll say is, well, yeah, it exists. It's just like a bear. It's just like a cougar. We see them, and it's just odd to hear some of the responses from a lot of people. It's like you said.
It's very matter of fact.
Yeah, it's very matter of fact. You're waiting for people to laugh about it, and then they don't. And a lot of times they'll tell you what they saw if you ask them. But people don't just jump the information out. You got to ask them, and they'll freely give the information on what they saw, and especially in those areas.
And what's interesting is oftentimes, now people either say there's usually one of 3 answers. I've never seen anything. I have seen something, and they'll tell you. Or they know someone, usually a personal friend or a family member that saw one.
Yeah. Yeah, you're right. You're absolutely right. Well, I know we got like 30 calls in the queue. And so
holy cow.
We're running out of time. Yeah, I feel bad. We'll have to do another call-in show. But and if you've called in to talk about your encounter or you have a comment, if you would, please email me or email all of us at support@sasquatchchronicles.com, and we'll bring you on the air the next time we have a show. But that's funny. I was telling Shannon tonight, I was like, I was kind of hoping to do like maybe an hour show, maybe like a 90-minute show. And here we are almost 2 hours into it. And I'm sorry if we bored everyone with the whole...
Too much good stuff.
I enjoy the caller shows. I really do enjoy those.
Yeah. No, I do too. It's just, I do too. It's enjoy. A lot of those stories we don't normally get. And when they call in, I wish we would have, I know we're running out of time, but I wish we would have planned better to take more and more of those calls. Should we bring one on before we close it out, or should we try and bring a couple of these on?
Let's try and bring them on if we can.
I was hoping he'd say no, kick the music on, let's get out of here.
Maybe we should do a total caller show next week.
Yeah, or even a midweek.
We probably should. Yeah, midweek. That's a good idea, Wes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Go ahead, Tony. You're on the air.
Hey, guys. How you doing?
Hey.
Good. How are you?
Good. I just want to say hi, Shannon. I'm the guy on Facebook that plays saxophone and flute, but not around the gift tree.
Oh, yeah. Hi, Tony. How you doing?
Good. Yeah, I emailed my encounter a couple of weeks ago, and it was in the Allegheny State Park forest. I was on college camp. We had a college camp. I think it was in September in about 1976. And what they were doing, they were trying this new thing where they could get people, to interact and meet each other. So they decided we would have this college camp, and they would take a lot of students out, to the state forest. So it must have been about maybe 75 students. So when we get out there, it was on a Friday. We must have gotten there probably around 1:30, 2 o'clock. We all had an assembly in the mess hall. And there were a couple of forest rangers there and everything, and they wanted to try this exercise where they would group several people together, and in our instance, it was like 6 of us. And they would give us a map and a compass, and they would take us about maybe a couple of miles away from the camp, and we had to make our way back to the camp. And they figured during that period, everybody would talk to each other and get to know each other, that type of thing. So a buddy of mine pretty much talked me into it because he says, hey, man, there's going to be a lot of hot girls out there. So they put us in this group. There was 3 girls and 3 guys. And what was funny about it, this one guy that decided to come along with us, he wasn't really prepared to be out in the woods. He actually had on platform shoes, so we were like, man, this is going to be fun with this guy. So the Rangers dropped us off at different spots, and we figured it was going to be easy because all we had to do was just backtrack, just make a beeline over this huge hill, and we would end up back in the camp. But anybody that's been out in the forest knows you can't walk in a straight line. So we were walking back through the woods, and it was really cool because the forest had like a canopy where it would cast this weird light over the forest floor. You could still sometimes see the sunshine through. So we're walking, and like I said, this one guy that was with us, he was wearing platform shoes, and we were just like, man, this guy is going to really hold us back. So we're walking along, we're talking, and everybody's introducing themselves to each other, and, where you from, and what's your major, so-and-so. And halfway through, he smelled something, because me and my buddy weren't really paying attention. We were just trying to get to know the girls, and he said, something's dead out here. And so we kind of sniffed the air, and sure enough, there was a smell. I don't know if you guys, I'm quite sure you guys had dogs when you were growing up, but I remember when a dog would find something dead and roll in it, and then he would come back home, and you're like, wow, when the hell have you been rolling in it? Well, that's kind of what it smelled like. It smelled like a dog that had rolled in something dead. So one of the girls said, something's definitely dead out here. So we just kept walking. Then we heard footsteps. I don't know if you guys are old enough to remember the show The Munsters.
Right.
there was a sound that Herman Munster used to make when he walked. It was like a thud. Well, this is kind of what we heard. We heard these thud-like footsteps. And so by this time, we were pretty much lost because we weren't paying attention to where we were going. So the guy with the platform shoes, he said, "Hey, I think that's one of the other groups." And he yelled out. He says, "Hey, we're lost. You guys know the way back." But they didn't answer. And so we kept walking, and then we heard these two grunts. It was like a, ooh, ooh. And then one of the girls said, "Is that a bear?" And I says, "I don't think it's a bear." I said, the other guy said, "Well, it sounds like a moose or something." We didn't know what it was. So we continued walking, and then we heard the footsteps again. About 30 yards away from us, to our flank, we saw something standing behind the tree. And it started doing this little sway. But we couldn't quite make out what it was because I mentioned earlier, there's this canopy, this wood canopy that kind of casts a dim light over the forest. But we knew it was somebody over there. Now, what we saw was a very tall person. Now, I have buddies that were on the basketball team, and they hadn't come, but this thing was taller than they were. And then the guy yelled out again, "Hey, we're lost. Can you guys help us get out of here?" And I says, that's not anybody from one of the other groups. And then we heard another sound. To the right of us, we heard like something was breaking tree limbs or something like that to the right of us. So we all looked at each other and we're like, let's get the hell out of here. So as we started walking really fast, the other guy I was telling you about with the platform shoes, he took his shoes off. He's walking now in his socks. And we're listening, and we could hear cars in the distance. And I said, "There's a road down there." So what we started doing was heading towards the sound of the road. And as we were walking, now whatever was following us is now behind us. And we literally ran down the side of this hill to get to the road. Once we got to the road, we flagged down the next car. And this older couple was coming through, and we piled in their car. And they says, "Where you guys come from?" I says, "We're from so-and-so camp." I forgot the number of the camp. It's been quite a while. And we piled in that car, and they took us back to the camp, and nobody said anything. Then when we got back to the mess hall, all the other groups had been back at least a half an hour. And it was getting dark, and we come busting in there, and everybody looks at us and start laughing, like, "What happened to you guys?" And the guy that was wearing the platform shoes says, "There's a monster out there," and everybody busts out laughing. And I had, to that point, never heard anything about Bigfoot. Only thing I was familiar with was the abominable snowman. But I'm thinking that's over in Nepal. But any bipedal creature that I was aware of was just that. And so when we got back to school, I went to the library and I started trying to figure out what it was that could have possibly been in there. And I looked at the indigenous animals to that area, and there were bear, there were deer, but there was nothing that was close to what we saw. And I would run into a couple of people on campus from time to time, and they would ask me, what do you think that was out there that we saw? And I had no idea. Then the Patterson film came out, and I said, oh, my God.
Yeah, then it starts making sense.
I said, I bet that's what it was. But when I saw the Patterson film, it was like in Northern California. So I'm saying, well, are these things everywhere? And I never told anybody about it. I told a couple of friends about it. You know, there's certain people, after having a conversation with them for a while, you can kind of determine, oh, I can't tell this person that. They're going to think I'm an idiot or something. But it was when I started seeing these television shows that I started realizing, you know, these things must be everywhere. Because when you see the Patterson film, the first thing comes to mind, okay, there's a group of them in the Northwest, a family of them. You don't quite imagine that they're all over the place. And so I started doing a little more research, and then I found, you know, with internet, I found that people were seeing something close to what we saw in the Allegheny Forest.
Yeah, no, it's definitely when you start putting the pieces together, it's, you know, from your encounter, and then you start seeing all these other things, then you start putting together what you actually saw. Tony, we're just about out of time.
Okay.
I appreciate you sharing your encounter very much. And I don't mean to cut you off. I know we're almost out of time.
Right.
But thank you so much for sharing it with us.
Oh, you're welcome. You're very welcome.
Let's go to Tracy. Tracy, you had an encounter you wanted to share with us?
Yes, I do.
Okay.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you just fine.
Okay. I live in East Central Alabama, and I had several encounters back in the early part of around 2002 or 2003 on some hunting club land that I used to have. And I reported them to the BFRO, kind of got the brush off, and they kind of didn't put what I reported on their site. But I have a job that keeps me traveling. This past July or August, I don't remember the date, I was going from Tuscumbia, Alabama to Bolivar, Tennessee. It was storming and, really heavy rain, heavy storms, and it's a pretty long stretch of. I'm sorry, this is. Anyways, I crossed over into Mississippi. I know I was not far from. I was not far from.
Take your time.
I'm sorry, but I'm getting shakes right now just thinking about this. I was within a mile and a half of Tishomingo High School on that highway. Just a really long, flat stretch, and the belt, the serpentine belt on my truck broke. I drive a big delivery van, a big Dodge Sprinter delivery van, and I pulled over and called into the office like we're supposed to do, and I told them I knew what had happened. I raised the hood up and looked. Sure enough, it was wrapped around everything. I got back in the truck, called the office. They said, "Okay, we'll get you somebody there, and as soon as we can." And I said, "Okay." Well, it's really stormy, but it was still really hot and humid. Just really sticky hot. But it was raining and storming too. And I got bored sitting there, so I decided to climb into the back of the van, which is open from the passenger car compartment to the cargo area, and start just straightening up the cargo, getting ready for my next delivery and everything. And it got kind of hot. I couldn't run the air or anything in the truck, so I opened the side cargo door on the truck just to get some air in there. And I had hung a flashlight from the ceiling so that I could see kind of what I was doing, you know. And I'd been doing this for about 15 or 20 minutes, and the rain had kind of slacked off a little bit. And well, nature called. You know, I had to take a leak. And I didn't want to get out of the van and get wet. I mean, I was already soaking wet with sweat. I don't know why it bothered me so much to get out in the rain, but I just kind of stood in the side cargo door. I was looking out the back windows of the vehicle to see if there was a vehicle coming, you know. There wasn't, and I just was standing there happily whizzing, and I heard a noise beside the van, out on the outside of the van, kind of the nearest thing I can describe is kind of like a deer snorting, or a horse snorting, you know, noise. And I had almost hit a deer not long before I had broke down. And I'm thinking, there's no way a deer is standing beside this truck right here. So I
It's all right. Take your time.
I'm still not believing what I saw when I stuck my head out the door of that vehicle. Now, this is a big Dodge Sprinter van, and I'm standing inside it, which it's 8 foot tall on the inside at least. I stick my head out the door, and I'm looking 12 inches away, face to face, with something I've never seen in my life.
Good Lord.
And it startled me. I stumbled backwards, and I deliver magazines, and we carry the magazines in these plastic tote boxes. Mm-hmm. And I had several of them open and scattered around me. When I stepped backwards, I tripped and fell backwards over several of those totes up against the driver's seat on the far side from the cargo door. And I'm still thinking I did not just see. To be honest, I think I urinated on it. Mm-hmm. I think I took a leak on whatever that was.
Right.
But I'm laying on a pile of totes thinking I did not just see it, and I'm trying to get my pants back up. I've already peed on myself and all in the truck. And it stuck its head in the door. And it looked at me. Now this thing, my feet, it could have just easily reached and grabbed my feet. And for a moment, I honestly thought that's what it was going to do. Mm-hmm. Well, I carry a lot of cash on my job, for my boss, and he's gotten us all permits to carry firearms because some of our drivers have been robbed before. I keep a 45 close by. I usually keep it clipped to the driver's seat, which is where it was. And at that moment, all I could think of was getting my hands on that thing. And I managed to. Now, this thing's got its head stuck in the truck looking at me. I'm reaching for the pistol, and it screamed a noise that vibrated the entire vehicle. And this is not a small truck. This is a Dodge Sprinter 3500 cargo van. This vibrated the entire vehicle. It vibrated like when you run across the rumble strip going down the road.
Right.
Strip on the road.
Mm-hmm.
That is exactly, I've hit that driving this thing down the road, and it actually vibrates and rattles and rings.
Right. Mm-hmm.
And it actually hurt my ears. It made me, the only other description I can give to that sound is one time I was standing really close to some railroad tracks when a train was crossing right there really slow, and he hit his horn, and that horn actually vibrated my skull so bad that I felt dizzy for a second.
Right.
That is the sound that thing made. Now I got my hands on my pistol, and I pointed it at it. And the expression on this, I don't even know what to call it.
It recognized the pistol, didn't it?
It looked at me. It was looking at me really, not really like angry, but like you're in trouble. But when I pulled the pistol and pointed at it, its eyes got really big.
Mm-hmm. It knew what it was.
Yeah. And then I remember it pursed its lips into like a big O, and it really made a really high-pitched, like a whoo sound.
Mm-hmm.
It was really loud and really high-pitched. I'm pulling the trigger, but nothing's happening. I realized I had the slide locked, and I'm trying to get it off. Before I could, it disappeared out of the vehicle. It pulled back and around. Well, I decided I got up. I clambered up. I scrambled up. I don't know how I'd done it, but I got up between the driver and passenger seats. And I'm trying to look out that back door down the side of the vehicle to see where it was, because I don't know how I'm terrified,
Yeah.
And
yeah, to say the least.
I took a step behind the driver's seat, the passenger seat, to look toward the rear of the vehicle, because that's where it had moved away to. And just before I got the balls up to stick my head out and look, it screamed again. And it moved diagonally from the rear of the vehicle past the door. It was going towards the front of the vehicle, but it was going away from me at about a 45-degree angle. And I don't know if you ever heard a 45 fired in an enclosed area, but
oh yeah, I was in the Army for 10 years.
Yeah, that's it. I pulled the trigger and it put me on my knees pretty much.
You probably lost your hearing for a while too.
Yeah, I all I heard was a pop and then a ringing noise.
Yep.
But as I did that, there was a flash of lightning. It had been storming, but it wasn't storming at that moment. But there was some distant lightning, and it lit up just enough that I could see that there was not one. There were at least
3 or 4.
There were at least 2 others that I saw. I emptied the magazine just out the door of that thing, and I keep 2 spare magazines clipped, next to the pistol itself. I normally don't. I don't know why I did at that time, but I reloaded, and I couldn't hear anything. I could just feel screams every few seconds, it felt like the vehicle was vibrating. I grabbed the cargo door and slammed it shut, and I jumped up into the driver's seat, and not far from where I was broke down, there's a small town, maybe 3-4 miles away, called Burnsville, Mississippi. I hoped the truck would crank, and it did. And I dropped it in gear, and I took off out of there. And I drove without lights and without windshield wipers all the way to Burnsville, Mississippi. And this is a very small town. There's like a couple of convenience stores, a restaurant or two, and that's pretty much it, you know. And I pulled in. The truck was nearly dead. It was dying. It was barely running when I pulled in. And then I had to call my boss and explain to him that I had moved the truck and that I needed to let him know where I was. I wasn't on the highway anymore.
Let me ask you a question.
Yes,
before you fired at the creature the first time, you heard the first time it made the first vocalization, and then when it saw the pistol, it made another sound. When it made the third vocal, was it more similar to the first or the second noise?
The first sound that it made, it was just like a very angry,
kind of more of a growl, or.
Well, you had a guy on that had worked in Smoky Mountain National Park as a college student.
Right.
And he imitated the sounds.
Oh, right.
And when I was listening to that story and he did it, it made the hair on my neck stand up. I was in my bedroom, in my bed, listening to that, and it made the hair on my neck stand up. That was the closest sound that I've ever heard to that.
I guess what I was asking is, the third time it made a sound, when it was outside the vehicle, was it closer to the first or second sound?
It was, I guess it would be closer to the first, like it was angry.
Yeah. My guess is what was going on was they were probably hunting, and the first time around they probably thought they had bagged you, and then when they saw the pistol, that was a warning to the others that you were dangerous. Now that's a guess, of course, but based on past behaviors, that would be my guess.
Tracy, I'm kind of curious. Can you describe the face and kind of what you saw?
Them and Us, that creature on Them and Us.
That's a very common one.
Thing, when I first heard you guys talking about that, I looked that up, and when that picture came up on my screen, I almost passed out.
Did you see its teeth by chance?
No, I did. I never did. It was dark. It had gotten dark.
Okay.
But it had. I was standing flat-footed in that vehicle. I'm 5'11". Now that vehicle probably stands a good 2 feet off the ground. And when I stuck my head out, I just stuck my head out and looked to the side of the vehicle. It was right there in my face. Now, I kind of got the impression that it was kind of hunched down a little bit.
Yeah.
But I'm not afraid to say that this thing was 8 to 9 foot tall.
Right. And I'll tell you what, that picture from Them and Us, I can't tell you how many times I sent that to people, and their response was and every time, almost uniformly, they were stunned. They'd never seen any artwork that close to what they saw. So you're right in there with a lot of other folks. The only
difference was it had a nose more like a human, a really wide and flat nose, and his eyes were just dark brown.
I've got it. If you send me an email, I'll send you a little updated version of that picture, and I'm pretty sure it'll be pretty close to exactly what you saw.
Honestly, Mr. Gibney, I'm not sure I'm going to see it. I mean, I have to drive that route. I just had to drive it this past week. And I've actually rearranged my route so that I don't go that part of the route at night anymore. I mean,
can you send me that location?
I sure can. That's why I wanted. I sent an email asking to get in touch with Coonbo because he's from Tuscumbia, Alabama, and
put you in touch with him.
I would really appreciate that. I really would, because I talked to my girlfriend at the time about that. She thought I was nuts, and she has been with me and saw some of the things that happened on our hunting club property. And I swear I thought I was losing my mind.
You're not crazy.
And why am I so scared now? Because I swear to God, I can't even go fishing anymore.
Because you know what's out there now.
I mean, this can't be real.
They're real.
How long ago did this happen, Tracy?
It was July or August of this past year.
Very recent.
I can't even give you the exact date of it. I don't know why I can't even remember the exact date of it.
Yeah. Yeah, you go through that after you had an encounter. I did the same thing. You know, you go through that where, it's traumatizing. You don't want, especially how close you were. You were really close, but you don't want to go out in the woods anymore. You don't want to go fishing anymore. And you kind of go through this mindset of, did this really happen? I mean, did I really see? Am I going crazy? Did I see what I thought I saw? And
I still feel that. I still ask myself that night sometimes, did that really happen? I mean, and I know it did. I swear, I am not lying. I am not making this up. I couldn't ever make anything like this up. I mean, this is just...
No, we believe you.
Yeah, no, I believe you 100%. And you'll go through that. I think time helps. And I think the more you kind of look into this and the more you kind of, even though you don't really want to, but the more you kind of start looking into this, it actually helps out a lot, because in your mind, after you've had an encounter, you're thinking, what are these things? You know, what am I?
It helps to incorporate it into your knowledge, so you can kind of come to terms with it.
Thank you guys so much. I swear.
Thank you, Tracy.
This is, you know, after the first experience I had, I thought it was sort of cool. You know, there's big feet around here, you know. And me and the guys in the hunting club, we all pretty much had the same attitude, because after I asked around a little bit, several others had experiences too, you know. We didn't pay it much mind. We figured if we didn't bother them, they won't bother us. But that thing that I saw that night, just outside of Tishomingo, Mississippi, that thing, I have no doubt in my mind that it was about to eat me, or it was about to kill me.
Yeah. That's probably exactly what they were planning.
You know, back when I was in the Army, I had a friend of mine from Colorado. And one year we took leave together. I spent 2 weeks with him, and he spent 2 weeks with me down here. And while I was out there in Colorado with him, we were hiking up in the mountains. And I knelt down to drink some water out of a mountain stream flowing out off the mountain. And when I looked up, there was a mountain lion on the other side of the creek looking at me. He shot at it and scared it away. But that fear that I felt that moment, multiply it by 10, and that's what I felt that night in that truck.
Oh yeah, I know what you felt. So does Wes.
I knew at that moment that I was not the predator. I was the prey.
It's like my first encounter. I think had I not been holding a rifle, I think the outcome would have been very different.
Do you really think that it would have? I mean, can you explain what you mean when you say that? I've heard you say that before.
I think they recognize weapons, and they know humans are dangerous to begin with, but if we have a weapon, I think that holds them at bay, to be honest with you.
I know this thing when I pointed that pistol at it.
It knew what it was.
Well, it looked at it curiously for about a second or two, and I was trying to pull the trigger, but I had the slide locked on it, and I could not get the slide lock. I couldn't function. I guess I was just shaking so bad. But then his face went from angry to curious, then to like, holy crap. And that's when it made this really loud kind of a whoop noise. And within a second of that, I got the slide lock off, and it disappeared from view. And it took me probably...
No, go ahead.
It took me probably 3 or 4 seconds to extract myself from the position where I was. I was kind of on my butt in some totes behind the driver's seat to get up and get between the driver and the passenger seats. So, you know, I've never seen anything move like this. It didn't even move like it was real. No.
Yeah, I said the same thing after my encounter. They don't move. It's almost like it almost seems, you know, and I hate to use the term otherworldly, but just the way they move. It's just like, man, are you even from this planet? You know, and I'm not suggesting they're aliens, but I'm just saying, like,
the speed and the agility.
Yeah, you've just never seen anything move like that. Yeah, just never.
It actually moved like a giant cat. I mean, like how cats are so smooth and fluid in their movements. That to me,
right.
And when it was running, when it ran past the door, when, you know, after all of that, when it ran diagonally away from the vehicle toward the wood line, I want to say that it took maybe 2 steps to cover about 25 or 30 yards.
Yeah.
I mean, it was that, like it went from 0 to 60 in 0.3 seconds. I mean, just that.
Yeah. They're extremely quick.
And when that flash of lightning, I know I saw 2 others. They were probably 30 yards away from the vehicle. They were standing kind of close together, and the other one was running past them.
See, that second vocal it made when you pointed the gun in it was probably a warning to the others.
To tell them that I was dangerous or something.
Absolutely.
I didn't feel dangerous at the moment.
You might have been in some real trouble there. You know, kind of like mine and Woody's encounter. It's almost like they were, I mean, you might have been in some, it's a good thing you had that gun on you.
Yeah, they were stalking you.
That's a horrifying thought. I mean, that's horrifying. I feel that. Every time I think about that, I feel that. But I was on the menu, and I didn't even know it. I wonder, and I've thought about this a lot, I wonder what would have happened if I hadn't stood up in the door and took a leak, you know. I mean, and
you may have been grabbed not or totally unaware of what was going to happen.
I seriously think I urinated on that one that was beside the vehicle, because I was, you know, it's a public highway, you know, modesty, and I was looking out the back window to make sure a vehicle wasn't coming, so I just kind of peed to the right, and it was like I said, like a deer snorting or a horse, you know.
When he gets for being too close.
Do I?
When he gets for being too close. I don't mean to laugh, but, you know, sometimes you got to make a situation a little light if you can.
I understand. I wish I could laugh with you, but and there are times when I sit back and think about it, I wonder what this thing thought when I peed on it, you know. I mean, did that make it mad or?
Hard telling. You know, these things have a short disposition anyway.
I mean, I've wondered if it was just curious to what I was doing, you know, in the back of that truck, the flashlight dangling from the roof, and you know, I mean, I was cussing a lot. I was pissed off because I'm broke down on the side of the road, in a truck that they knew was going to break down, and
the noises probably attracted it.
You think?
And that one may have just come up to see, been scouting to see what was going on there.
Yeah.
That area where it happened is like there's a lot of hardwoods. Some of it on the opposite side of the road has been clear cut, but I don't know if it was clear cut at that time or not. I really don't remember.
Well, do this for me, Tracy. Send me your contact information. Send me an email again, will you? And I apologize for not responding back to your first email. I get flooded so much with emails, and I know Will and Shannon do too. But if you go to the website, all of our contact info's there. Would you mind sending me your info, and we'll put you in contact with Kumbo. And I can't thank you enough for coming on. I mean, I understand how you're feeling now. I mean, God, that's so fresh in your mind. It just happened. The only thing I can tell you that it does get better with time. It seems like time kind of makes it.
Yeah, stay in touch with us, and we'll help you work through it.
I really appreciate that, guys, because I'm really getting tired of paying for these Xanax.
Yeah.
No problem.
Yeah, no problem at all. But yeah, definitely shoot me your info if you don't mind.
I will do that, and I'd like for Will to send me those pictures that he's had done about that them and us.
Absolutely.
Creature. Yeah. Because when I first saw that picture of them and us, Neanderthal, the first thought in my head was, it's back. There it is again. I mean, the only difference was the eyes. You know.
Right, that's a type 2 creature.
And if I'm not mistaken, I've heard y'all say they're the most aggressive, right?
Right.
So I was probably a steak dinner for somebody, huh?
It's hard telling. I mean, they could have been just checking you out. That does seem fairly aggressive behavior, though. I mean, just sticking its head right in there, and then, the way it behaved.
It's very ballsy.
It leaned down and stuck its head. I could have reached out and kicked it if I wanted to, but I was too afraid to. I mean, It was that close to me. And I remember when it had its head stuck in, like it leaned down and looked in. It just kind of stuck its head in and was looking at me. I remember its hand was hanging down past the door, the bottom of the doorstep. I could see its elbow, but I couldn't see its forearm on down to its hand. And all I was thinking was, this thing's supposed to snatch me out of here. Because I remember I kept watching its arm. Because if its arm moved, I was going to fight. That was all I had to do, But you guys are... I don't think I'm going to get any sleep tonight, but you guys have really helped, seriously. Because I've had to fight this through my head ever since then. Over and over.
You'll get through it okay, though. I know it's difficult right now to believe that, but you will. We'll help you.
How long did it take?
All the stuff you're going through, with, did that actually happen? Did I actually see what I saw? Was I dreaming? Do these things really exist? I went through all. I know. I'm sure Will went through it all too. You go through that. It's pretty natural to go through all of that.
It is. Yeah.
How long did it take for you guys to get normal again? I mean, I got invited to go fishing a few weeks ago, and night fishing for catfish on the river. And I said yes at first, but then I chickened out. I couldn't do it.
I think generally if you're with a group of people, you're okay.
I couldn't convince myself of that night.
Yeah, no, it takes a while you have to sort of absorb it into your mind and sort of come to terms with the idea, and then you'll get past that. So, but it does take time.
Yeah, I would say the only thing that doesn't go away, especially at night when you're out in the forest, is you're very on high alert. At least for me, if I'm out at night, I'm I'm very much on high alert. I'm very much aware of what's going on around me. And I would say,
for me, even after, it's the same for me even after all these years.
Can I ask
even
a
during the
question?
day. Yeah.
Does it even affect you, like, when you're not out in the woods? I mean, like the warehouse where we pick up our truck and, where we drop off our vehicles, I usually park on the back side of the lot. No particular reason. I just always have. And I've gotten to the point where it scares me. I mean, it's a kind of a well-lit area, but it scares me to walk to my car and crank it up. I mean, I stand there.
Well, you were basically in shock. I mean, it's almost like PTSD in a way. You're still suffering the effects of that encounter.
And that's something else. I'm a combat veteran, and I saw a psychiatrist to deal with those issues, and had minor issues when it came to that. It wasn't that bad, but this is totally just.
I've had other people I've talked to that were in combat and say the same thing. With all they saw in combat, experiencing this makes combat pale.
It does. I mean, I knew what was going on in combat, and I knew that I might die any second, but I had a job to do, and I was focused and trained to focus on that. But this, I'm on the side of the road, broke down, just in the back of the truck, killing time. And I don't even know what to say sometimes when I start feeling things. Like right now, I smelled its breath when I leaned out the door. It breathed hot air in my face, and I smelled it.
Mm-hmm.
And its breath smelled kind of like a dog's breath, kind of like maybe a dog with a bad tooth, like it had been eating something rotten,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I swear, its face was 12 to 16 inches away from me when I looked out. It was right there. And
too close.
I cannot make myself believe. I mean, but I can't make myself not believe. You know what I mean? Of this.
Yeah, it's outside of your frame of reference. I mean, until you can sort of absorb, like Wes was saying, sometimes it helps to do a little research and kind of listen and look at what other people have experienced and know that you're not alone in that there's a lot of us out there that have seen these things up close.
Can I ask you a question about your experience?
Sure.
Mr. Jim, how close, when you walked up on them, how close were you away from them?
I was less than 15 feet.
And I remember you saying that you saw the one and you didn't know that there was another.
Right.
Well, what was the first thought that went through your head when you saw the one? I mean,
was holy shit, what's that? That's exactly what went through my mind. It was an oh my God moment. I was just, I'd hunted deer and elk and bear and everything with my dad and uncle, and I thought I was pretty familiar with everything out in the woods. I mean, hell, I lived to be in the woods, and go fishing and stuff like that. And you walk up on something like that, and when I say it's an underwear changing moment, I'm not kidding. You want to crap yourself.
Did you feel at that moment like you were prey? Did you feel like you were the
not instantly? Not instantly, because for me it was. I was 16, so it was of course, all from your experience, everything goes in your mind in milliseconds. All these things, and I thought the first question was, "What the hell is this?" And then I thought, "Oh, that must be what made the footprints we found a couple of years before." And then the next thought was, "What the hell am I going to do now?" Because I was only holding a .22 rifle.
Yeah.
And the thing was massive. I mean, it was, like I said, it was probably a good 800 pounds.
I would guess this one was probably in the neighborhood of 5 or 6. It was, what I saw of its upper body was huge.
Yeah.
I remember its arm was about the size of my leg. It was
Yeah.
It was huge, but it wasn't anywhere in the neighborhood of the ones that I've heard you guys talk about. You know, I probably would have passed out on the spot if I'd seen one that big.
All I remember thinking was it looked pissed.
That's the first thought in my head when this one looked at me. And when I looked out into its face, that was the first thing I thought. But Wes, can I ask you a question about your experience?
Yeah, absolutely.
I heard you talking about you and your brother's experience, and you were afraid for your brother to, you know, drive past it because you thought it might, you know, flip the car.
Right.
Can you tell me why you felt that? I mean, what made you feel like it would do that, or like it wanted to do that?
I think the reason why, it's kind of like what Will says. I think 1,000 things go through your mind on, you know, what are you looking at? My immediate thought was monsters. I was like, well, I guess monsters do exist. You know, I went down to like a 3rd grade level with what I thought I was looking at, and all I could compare it to was a monster. And the thing that we saw, I think the type of creature you saw, Tracy, being in the 500 to 600 pound range is about what we hear, especially for the area that you're in. The one that Woody and I saw, I would say was probably right around the 10-foot range. And if I were to guess, just from years of hunting, I would say this thing was about 1,000 pounds. And the way it had stepped out, the way its mannerisms were, the way I got the impression like it wanted to fight. And when we were looking at it, it was just so big. I thought this thing could easily grab the edge of the car and tip us over with us in it. It was just massive. It was the biggest thing I'd ever seen in my life. And it was the way it was carrying itself was almost like it wanted to fight. So
it was challenging you.
I got that impression from that one that I came face to face. I got the impression that it was wanting to show me who was the boss. I mean,
right, and that's typical. That's very typical. And that's kind of what was happening with Wes. Was kind of showing him who was boss, and that's what primates do. They sort of, you know, they're sort of doing that display to say, hey, you know, let's find out who's tougher here, and they want you to know that they are.
Yeah, and I think when they're getting ballsy like that, that's not a good time to put them to the test, because I think you're going to come out on the bad end of the stick if you do.
Yeah, I lost some hearing in my ear from that.
See, with my encounter, it was more of a neutral situation, I think, because I believe, looking back, that the second one was the younger one, and the bigger one knew that I was armed. It saw the rifle, and I think it probably didn't want that situation to escalate in any direction. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I tend to think that's why they just stood there and really didn't do anything. Of course, I took off running. Where with Wes and Woody didn't do anything, and they were doing their demonstrations around them, their challenge.
Yeah.
And in your case, you were unaware, and it came right up, and they were. Of course, that was a different type. But Wes and I saw both were type 1s, like what you see in the Patterson film.
Yes, sir.
It's a different temperament than the type 2s.
Why do you think that is? I've heard y'all talk about that before.
Well, the type 1s and 4s might be a little bit closer to our family as humans. I don't know. The type 2s and 3s seem to be a little bit more animalistic. It's really difficult to tell without more information.
Yeah, the only thing I can liken it to is when you compare like a gorilla, a chimp, and a baboon. Baboons are known for having, and again, I'm not saying a Sasquatch is a chimp, a ape, or baboon, but as you go through the different primates, there's some that are,
more aggressive than others.
Very much more aggressive than others, and will have no trouble ripping your face off. While a gorilla just might do a little display, let you know who's boss, and may or may not rip your arm out of your socket and beat you with it. But a chimp or a baboon will rip your face off.
Yeah, and that's a good point. And it's not. You're right. It's not saying that they're this or they're that. But I'm sure any anthropologist will say, well, you use comparative behaviors with other primates to talk about, a different primate.
All I know is I've heard people, I've seen reports on the BFRO, people talking about, them being gentle or curious and this, that, and the other.
The BFRO has no idea what they're talking about.
This thing that I saw was not gentle. It may have been curious, but I think he was curious in the fact is what I might taste like. I mean, this was an animal.
Very possible.
This was not. When I looked in his eyes, I saw an animal. I did not see a human, even though it had similar human features. Its face was similar to a human. Its nose had really big eyes. I remember that.
Mm-hmm.
To me, it looked like a large chimpanzee. Really?
Yeah, and I think a lot of witnesses use the comparison similar to human. Now, folks, that doesn't mean they're human.
No, it doesn't.
That's the nearest comparison of similarity. It doesn't mean it looks human, but it has similar features.
This was a very wild and dangerous animal. I have no doubt of that.
Yeah, it's interesting, Tracy, when you talk about, and I know we're going to have to wrap up the show here shortly, but, and I don't know if you've heard the Siege of Hanabi episode that we did. I think it's episode 11. But I know the brothers in there, they talk about that. He went up to a dumpster and it had stepped up from the dumpster and looked down at him. And it really wasn't that scared of him until it noticed he had a gun in its hand. And when it looked down at the gun in its hand, its eyes got real big. And that's when it ducked back down and decided it was time to go. Almost like it knew that he had the gun.
Yeah.
It knew what the gun was.
That's exactly how this one looked when I pointed the pistol at it. Its eyes, like I said, he was looking at me with kind of like this angry glare. He was kind of baring his teeth a little, well, I won't say baring his teeth. He just kind of had his lips parted. Maybe he was breathing hard. I don't know. But when I pulled the pistol out, he had this look of curiosity, like, what in the hell is that? But when I pointed it at him, that's when his eyes got really big. And I remember his lips curling into a big O shape going, I can't imitate the sound, but it was like a woo, but it was really loud. And he disappeared, just that quick, He knew I had a weapon.
Well, I'll tell you what. Up until the 70s or 80s, we went out and shot every damn thing out there, and I'm very positive these things know exactly what guns do. So when they see one, they know what it is.
I'm positive of that too, because of the expression on this creature's face when I pointed that pistol at it. It looked momentarily terrified, like it was afraid for just a moment. Then it instantly went back to this angry look while it was making that ooh sound, and it disappeared. And that's when I stood up and, not thinking about where I was, I just pointed out the door and pulled the trigger, and that was the wrong thing to do. I still regret that. I have some hearing loss in my left ear because of that.
Oh yeah, I'll bet.
Well, thank you, Tracy, for coming on. We really do appreciate it. And if you would, shoot us an email, and I'd like to talk.
Keep in touch with us.
Yeah, I'd like to talk to you offline.
I will definitely do that. I would definitely love to get in touch with Cousin Bro because I've heard him. I've listened to every one of your shows ever since I found it, and I found you guys about 2 or 3 months ago. And I'd really like to talk to Cousin Bro because this is his area. I've heard him talk about some of the areas that he's talked about. I actually know where he's talking about. Yeah. And I guess I just want somebody to reassure me that I'm not hallucinating. I didn't hallucinate. This is not a figment of my imagination like I had a couple of friends tell me.
Well, we can tell you you're not hallucinating.
You guys have helped me tremendously. I cannot tell you the relief I feel right now just having talked to you guys. But
yeah, your descriptions are right on.
I will definitely send you guys an email, and any other information you want, I'll gladly send it to you. I mean, I can take you to the exact spot. I just had to drive by there this past Wednesday. So
yeah. Okay, we appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you so much.
I appreciate you guys, and you guys keep up the good work, really. So
thanks, Tracy.
Thank you, guys. Good night.
What an encounter, huh?
Yeah, it's awesome.
Yeah. Probably one of the best ones I've heard. That was
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, Jesus.
Yeah,
that really affected him.
Yeah, it did. Well, I want to let everyone know, if you get a chance, please go to SasquatchChronicles.com, and if you check us out. I know we put a lot of work into the website, and a lot of people have getting a lot of positive feedback on it. And there's a lot of uncut shows that you can hear on it. So if you get a chance, please check us out, SasquatchChronicles.com. If you want to contact Will, myself, or Shannon, all of our contact information is in there on the About page. And so much for the 90-minute show, huh?
Yeah.
It was awesome to hear.
Before we think we're going to do a short one and it goes long.
Yeah, it was great hearing those encounters from Tony and Tracy. Good encounters, and we appreciate it. And I apologize to everyone that we didn't get to. There's still a long call queue that we didn't get to, so I apologize to everyone. Look for Shannon's show tomorrow night. Show notes with Shannon. I may even pop in there. I think you have Sarah and John Brown on, don't you, Shannon?
Yeah, they're both going to be on. Yeah, that'll be great.
Yeah, and I know you got a boatload of audio files loaded up for tomorrow night too. So should be a great show. And I want to thank all our audience. I want to thank everyone who has supported us. And I want to thank everyone for listening. We will see everyone next week. Have a great night, everyone.